Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're tuning in from. My name is Perron Goodyear, and I am the Director of Emergency Disaster Services for the Salvation Army in Canada and Bermuda. I'm so glad that you joined us for our Emergency Preparedness Week webinar, where I hope you're going to learn more about how to be ready for anything. First, I want to acknowledge this sacred land upon which I'm privileged to live and work. I recognize the deep connection and the long-standing relationship between Indigenous peoples and the land of London, Ontario. This land is the traditional territory of those listed on the screen and continues to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of our society. One of the key things that I have discovered in recent years is that there's really no such thing as a natural disaster. Damon Coppola says it this way: it's been said before that no disaster is natural because any disaster event by definition requires interaction with humans, their built environment, or both. However, the many forces that elicit these disasters are in fact natural phenomena that occur regardless of the presence of people. It is possible, and is often the case, that human actions exacerbate the effects of these natural processes. So disasters happen when the effects of a hazard are beyond the capacity of a population to cope. Whether it's a natural or a human-caused hazards, it's people's vulnerability and resilience that help to determine if the hazard is going to become a disaster. And resilience is that adaptive capacity to cope both individually and as a community. Individual and household resilience, which is increased by preparedness, is that first step towards community resilience. And so we'll use Dennis Milletti's definition of resilience, which means that a locale is able to withstand an extreme natural event without suffering devastating losses, damage, diminished productivity, or quality of life without a large amount of assistance from outside the community. And so emergency preparedness is one of the critical aspects that can reduce individual, household, and community vulnerability. According to Public Safety Canada, during their review of the disaster financial assistance arrangements, investing in disaster preparedness and mitigation not only saves money during a response, but it reduces the social impacts of the hazard. And so while the financial benefits are significant, increasing the resilience of people will ultimately strengthen a community's ability to be able to prevent a hazard from becoming a disaster. Again, according to Public Safety Canada, the first step in emergency preparedness is knowing about the risks in your area. Next, to assist households in completing emergency plan, there's templates that are provided. And the final step in emergency preparedness involves purchasing or making a kit that will allow each household to be self-sufficient for at least 72 hours following the impact of a hazard. And these three steps form the basis of emergency preparedness. So before we go any further, do we have any questions so far? So one question I see here: should individuals prepare for specific things like tornadoes or wildfires? Generally, we take an all hazards approach to emergency preparedness, in that we're going to prepare in most cases the same way, either to evacuate or to shelter in place. And so generally the specific hazard type is not as relevant when it comes to preparedness. Some of those actions that you take when something happens, like if there's a tornado warning, getting to the lowest room in your house and away from windows, is that just-in-time actions that you would take. But as far as preparedness itself, it would be the same regardless of the hazard. Okay, so now we're going to look at each of these steps to emergency preparedness in a little bit more detail. Many people think that Canada is free from many of the risks that are faced by other countries. In fact, early in my career, I was told that we don't have disasters in Canada. As you can see from the map that we're about to look at, that's far from true. So this map will show you the various known risks within Canada, including ocean dangers, tornadoes, tsunamis, landslides and avalanches, and earthquakes. And so if we zoom in a little bit, if you live on the West Coast, you'll see here some of the hazards that are known to be significant risks on the West Coast, including earthquakes and tsunamis. And if we move over to the East Coast, again, you'll see here tornadoes, earthquakes, tsunamis, landslides, and avalanches. All of these things are known to be risks within Canada. And so the first step really is to identify those risks. And that's the process of finding, recognizing, and recording risks. The objective of risk identification is to look at those risks that may have a significant impact on Canada or on Canadians. And so that will include an analysis of short-term threats and hazards, those that could take place within the next 5 years, and as well as the emerging and future threats and hazards, things from 5 to 25 years. And the objective of risk analysis is to understand the nature and level of risk in terms of both its likelihood and what the impact would be. And some of the information that's used to determine the likelihood of a risk is looking at historical data on past events and frequency of contributing events like weather conditions. Has it happened before? How often do they happen? And then we also have simulation models of sequences of events and associated consequences. And the risk analysis will include estimations of the impacts for people, the economy, the environment, Canada's reputation and influence, as well as society and psychosocial impacts. And then once identified, the next step in assessment is the assessment or the analysis of the risk. And that includes the likelihood or probability and the impacts or its consequences. So likelihood is an estimate of the chance of an event happening. And again, this is often based on historical data. For example, has it ever happened before? And then the risks can have many potential impacts or consequences. For instance, a predetermined set of impact questions that can be used to better assess risk consequences, such as, does the risk have the potential to impact a large geographical area? So is it isolated or is it going to take place over a larger geographical area? Does it have the potential to impact the health of the population? Does the risk have the potential to impact on the Canada-US border? And finally, does the risk have the potential to impact the environment in the long term? And if you look at those three questions, 3 of the 4, we could say that COVID-19 did have an impact on a large geographical area, obviously on the population health, as well as there has been impacts on the Canada-US border. And so these impacts can be expressed in terms of monetary, technical, operational, social, or human criteria. And so let's take a look at the impact categories. These are the primary categories that can be impacted. So first of all is people. And this includes fatalities, physical injuries, displacement, chronic diseases, as well as mental illness. The impact on the economy, which encompasses direct as well as indirect losses on the Canadian economy. The environment, which is the type of response, the geographical extent, magnitude, and duration of damage. Again, territorial security. So this includes disruption in the effective functioning of an area or a border, including the area affected, combined with duration and population density. Next, Canada's reputation and influence, which are situations that would result in a shift in views towards the reputation and influence of Canada and actions taken by citizens and or stakeholders as a consequence. And finally, society and psychosocial, which captures the impact of widespread public anxiety as well as outrage. So let's take a quick look at a couple of examples of those known risks in Canada. Flooding, especially during the spring, is a risk in many parts of the country, as you can see from this map. And so if you're in an area that is known to be in a flood risk, there are things that you can do to prepare. And many communities have a floodplain map that's available that outlines specific areas. I know here where I live in London, there is a floodplain, and you can't build any houses or anything on that floodplain. And if you want more information, you can visit Flood Smart Canada for more of that information. And we're going to provide that link in the chat to Flood Smart Canada. Another area of risk in Canada is the risk of earthquakes. And in some areas, you'll know that this also provides an added risk of a tsunami, which can be triggered by an earthquake. And so you'll see here, both in the east and west and up north, that we are at risk for earthquakes. And so again, if you live in one of these areas, you can get more information on earthquake preparedness by visiting Earthquakes Canada. And again, we'll provide a link in the chat for you to take a look at that information. Any questions now regarding risks? Great question, Nicole. Weather is not a disaster. Weather like snow, rain, or a flood is certainly a hazard, but again, it only becomes a disaster if it's beyond an individual or a community's capacity to cope with it. So those things can certainly turn into disasters. Things like the big snowstorm in Newfoundland and Labrador last year could certainly be considered a disaster if it becomes beyond the capacity to cope. Great question. You can know what the risks are in your area, again, by visiting getprepared.ca. You can take a look. Most communities have done a risk analysis, and these may be available on your local community website. You can talk to the emergency management department within your municipality and try and determine what risks there are. Most municipalities will have done a risk assessment in order to determine what's most likely to happen, and again, what are the consequences if that particular hazard happens. Absolutely, climate change is having an effect. We do see that not only is the frequency of hazards increasing, but also the severity of them. So in both parts of the risk analysis, both the likelihood of them happening as well as the impacts on them are drastically increasing with climate change. Absolutely, nuclear can become a disaster. It is generally considered a human-caused hazard, but certainly, especially a nuclear explosion. And again, it can also be one that is brought about by other things, as we saw a number of years ago, where it could be an earthquake and a tsunami that then also causes a nuclear hazard as well, or a nuclear disaster. Absolutely, Peter. The pandemic is considered a health emergency, and certainly in many cases would be considered a disaster because it has been beyond the capacity of folks to cope. And particularly, many of our hospitals have been overwhelmed, and it would meet the criteria in most cases, which is why the pandemic was declared. Great question from our friends at Hazardscape. The Salvation Army is certainly involved with specific planning in BC on all the different hazards, and getting involved in earthquake drills. Haven't heard specifics about volcanoes, the volcanic hazard, but we would certainly be involved in any planning and preparations that are taking place there. All right, so let's take a look at making a plan. The next step in preparing to be ready for anything is to make a plan for you and your entire household. Information required includes identifying exits, meeting places, as well as evacuation routes. It also includes having copies of important documents like identification for everyone in the household, including children. Don't forget about pets and people with any special care needs. It's also important to include health information, medications, medical equipment, and keeping important phone numbers in one place, as well as identifying an out-of-town contact that everyone in the household is aware of, will make family reunification easier. And although this might sound like a lot of work, there are some great templates available at getprepared.ca, and we'll take a look at one of these templates right now. So if you can see on your screen, some of the information that we're looking for is those meeting places. So identifying a place near your home that's a meeting place, especially important if you have children and an evacuation has to take place, say, during a school day, or if they're in another location, they know where they're going to meet you outside of the home. Again, somewhere outside of that immediate neighborhood, if you do have to go, and everybody knows where that is. And knowing what your evacuation routes are to get out of your neighborhood. And how do you get out? What are the evacuation routes? What's the best way to evacuate? Think about your workplace. Is there an emergency plan at your workplace? Are you familiar with it? Do you know specifically not just fire alarms, emergency exits, meeting points? Who are the designated safety personnel? Again, for your children, does their school or daycare, do they have an emergency plan? Do you know what it is? Know what they're going to do. How are they going to contact families if an emergency happens? And, you see here what type of authorization the school or daycare requires to release your child to a designated person if you're not able to pick them up. And so, again, thinking about that, if there's an evacuation during the day and you're at your workplace or your children are at school, do you know what that process is? It's going to relieve a lot of stress and anxiety. If you have some idea, you know what the plan is. Keeping those important documents, having them both in your plan. Also a good idea if you've got a fire safe that you can keep those important documents, birth and marriage certificates, passport, licenses. You'll see all of those there. Photos of family members in case anybody gets lost. And again, keep them not only inside your house, but keep a copy outside your house that you can access if you do have to evacuate quickly. Do you have them somewhere? These days, maybe it's on the cloud somewhere, but making sure you've got access to those documents somewhere. Keeping up-to-date information for your school or daycare, who those designated people are, as well as keeping school contact information. Again, always remember to plan for your pets. We hear oftentimes in disaster and emergency management, people saying they're not evacuating without their pets. I understand it. I'm not leaving without my dog, but understand and make a plan for them. If they're not allowed to go into the public shelter or not allowed in the specific hotel, do you have a boarding place or somewhere where you can leave your pets, that you can get them out, but make sure that they're safe? Look at any special health needs. You'll see here a list. Consider writing down these details. If there's specific allergies, medical history, any medical conditions or medications, especially if they're life-saving medications, make sure that you have those written down. And those medications, make sure you've got not only specifically what the medication is, what the dose is, so that if you do have to evacuate and need to try and get more medication, you know exactly what it is that you're looking for. Again, keep a copy in your emergency kit and also make sure that somebody outside of your area has it. You can see here, talk to your doctor about your grab and go bag. And if you can, have 2 weeks supply of medications there and making sure that you are rotating through those medications. So here's where you would include that, writing down the health information, any medication or medical equipment. where that grab and go bag is. One of the things we often find is that people have a lot of the items for their emergency kit, but it's because they've got them as an everyday thing, like a can opener, but they don't actually have it all in one place and ready to go, that if they have to evacuate very quickly, as we've seen in the past in Canada, even with things like the Fort McMurray fire, which was 5 years ago this week, people had to leave with very little time to be able to grab things. So having all of those things in a grab and go bag and knowing exactly where it is great. You can see, again, you can get information on getprepared.ca for things for specific risks, such as earthquakes, power outages, floods, as well as severe storms. Again, you can work on a neighborhood safety plan. We used to have block parents and neighborhood watches in a lot of communities. But if you know your neighbors, having some kind of a neighborhood safety plan, and again, having emergency contact information. These days we have our cell phones, making sure that you've got chargers and things like that for your cell phone, or a backup emergency battery for your cell phone. If that's where you keep all your contact information, make sure that it's going to be accessible. And again, having a hard copy is not a bad idea. Obviously, we know for emergencies 911, but looking at any of those non-emergency numbers, again, an out-of-town contact, making sure you know specifically all of the contact information as well as an address. One of the reasons it's important to have that out-of-town contact is so that, again, if you and members of your household are evacuated separately, and you aren't able to get in touch with them directly, you can both reach that out-of-town contact and provide health and welfare information to that out-of-town contact. So as an example, if your kids call and say, I'm at such and such a location, I'm with my classmates, and here's where we are, then you can call and retrieve that information from your out-of-town contact and put your mind at ease and know exactly where your children are. Again, having that family, friends, keeping their information written down. Many people nowadays don't remember specific phone numbers because, again, we all have them saved in our device. So it's not a bad idea to have those numbers, and make one of the important things with your emergency plan is to make sure that you are checking it on a regular basis to make sure that the information is still up to date. If people have changed phone numbers or any of the information changes, you've got the most up-to-date information. Keeping track, again, of medical information, family doctors, knowing who your insurance agency and company is, having that, especially if you don't have it stored in your phone, making sure that you've got all of that, any home security information, all of this should be written down and easily accessible. And again, here, making sure that you've got all of your home safety instructions, carbon monoxide detectors, smoke alarms, fire extinguisher, and make sure that you've got a well-stocked first aid kit. And so you can see all of this information, which again is available in the planning documents. Keep track of exactly where your fire extinguishers are, making sure that it is the right fire extinguisher for the right location, in that a kitchen fire extinguisher is for specific products in your kitchen. Making sure you know where the water valve, the electrical panel, gas valve, all of those things are in case you need them in an emergency. And again, making sure that you know those emergency instructions, when to call 911, teaching your children specifics on when to call an emergency, when to dial 911, and what to tell them. And again, this template is available at getprepared.ca, and I know that it is currently being updated by Public Safety Canada. Now, if you're like me and you prefer to do things digitally, and I do that because my handwriting is terrible, the same template can also be completed online, and you can print your personal version, either to be printed or downloaded, with all of your information already filled out in it. So before we move on to getting or making a kit, do we have any questions? Absolutely, you should practice your plan. Same as any fire escape plan, and we're taught in school to practice. Always a good idea to practice your plan. Make sure that you review it again multiple times during the year to make sure that it's not, you know about it and everybody in your household is familiar with the plan and know what happens. Because what you don't want to do is be taking that plan out during an emergency and trying to remember all of those things and reading through it in depth. You want to make sure you're as familiar with it as possible. Okay, so let's talk about getting or making an emergency kit. Final step to be ready for anything is to make or buy an emergency preparedness kit. Experts suggest that you have everything you need in order to be self-sufficient for at least 72 hours or 3 full days following a significant incident. This self-sufficiently includes planning to be without critical infrastructures, such as utilities and waters. Disaster and emergency management professionals, especially throughout North America, promote the idea that individuals and households need to be prepared for those 3 full days because it may take this long before emergency responders can reach certain areas for rescue and response operations or for administrators to organize their response. And as I already mentioned, you may have some of these items already, such as food, water, and a flashlight. The key is to make sure that they are organized and easy to find. For example, would you be able to find your flashlight in the dark? Make sure your kit is easy to carry and everyone in your household knows where it is. You can keep it in a backpack, a duffel bag, or a suitcase with wheels. Make sure it's easy to reach, accessible place, maybe like a front hall closet. And if you have as many people in your household, your emergency kit could get heavy. It's a good idea to separate some of these supplies maybe into backpacks. That way your kit will be more portable and each person can personalize his or her own grab bag. So let's go through some of the basic emergency kit items. So we're looking at water. At least 2 liters of water per day per person. You can include small bottles that can be carried easily in case of an evacuation. Food that won't spoil, such as canned food, energy bars, and dried food. And again, with both your food and water, you need to remember to replace those items at least once a year. Often we recommend that you check the expiry dates the same time that you go through and check your smoke detectors, which is when the times change, depending on where you are in the country. In the spring and in the fall, go and make a point of checking your emergency supplies. Next is a manual can opener. If you've got those canned items, you need to make sure that you can open them. And of course, you want a manual can opener to make sure that if you don't have power, you're still able to do that. A crank or battery powered flashlight. Again, if it's battery powered, make sure you've got those extra batteries. And again, replace the batteries at least once a year. A crank or battery powered radio. And again, extra batteries. You may also want to get a weather radio, which will warn you of potential weather hazards that are taking place. You want to make sure that you're able to get the most up-to-date information from radio stations. And so having that readily available is very important. A first aid kit, and making sure that you, again, are checking your supplies, making sure that this first aid kit is used specifically for your emergency kit. Next, extra keys to both your car and your house, and making sure that those are, again, readily accessible in case something happens. Those are in your go bag. Some cash, preferably in smaller bills, such as $10 bills that you can use. If there are no bank machines open and debit and credit are not working, you've got a little bit of cash change for pay phones for the places that those still exist. Again, keep a copy of your emergency plan as well as contact information. And if applicable, other items such as prescription medications, infant formula, equipment for people with disabilities, food, water, and medications for your pets or service animals. And again, you're going to look at personalizing these things according to your needs. Some additional items that you may want to consider is 2 additional liters of water per person for cooking and cleaning, candles and matches or a lighter. You're going to want to make sure that those candles are in a deep, sturdy container. A change of clothing and footwear for everybody in the household. Sleeping bag or a warm blanket, toiletries, hand sanitizer, these days, additional masks, utensils, garbage bags, toilet paper, water purifying tablets, basic tools, a whistle in case you need to attract attention, and duct tape, which can be used to tape up windows, doors, and air vents. Again, we mentioned keeping cash on handy as bank machines and their networks may not be working, and you may have difficulty using debit or credit cards. Another option, if you want to put together your own kit, is to visit your local Salvation Army thrift store, like this one in Winnipeg.
Hi, I'm Chris Kerr, Winnipeg District Manager of the Salvation Army Thrift Store. I'm here to show you how you can create your own affordable emergency preparedness kit with many common thrift store items. You probably have a flashlight, a can opener, and other essential survival items at home. But would you remember to quickly grab them when an emergency is happening in real time? A dedicated emergency preparedness kit ensures that you and your loved ones have the basic items you'll need if the unexpected happens. Easily accessible and all in one place. Now let's start finding your kit items. Our first stop is the housewares section. Here we can find things like a manual can opener, battery-powered radio, crank flashlight, candles, tools, pliers, a wrench, a hammer, scissors, multi-use screwdriver, even a pocket knife. The other thing you can pick up here as well is luggage to store all your product in. Next up is our clothing and accessories section, where you can find a change of clothing and footwear for every member of your household. You can also pick up a wallet for bills and small change to use in payphones. Come on, let's keep on shopping. Lastly, our bedding and linen section has plenty of blankets to keep in your kit for you and your family to stay warm in case of a power outage. Now that you have all of these items, you can start assembling your kit. With 100 locations across Canada, your local Salvation Army thrift store is always ready to serve you and help you find items for your kit.
Now, if you prefer to purchase a pre-made kit, the Salvation Army does have those available, like this one. You can order the kit online, and we will provide you with some more information later. Let's take a look inside this kit. So we've got a flashlight, as well as extra batteries. We've got work gloves, emergency drinking water, and again, enough of our water. We've got a small first aid kit. Again, batteries for the flashlight, glow sticks, our emergency food rations, a blanket which will help retain heat, and an emergency poncho to help with all weather conditions. So this is just one example of our pre-made kit that, again, you can purchase from the Salvation Army, and these kits are available for just over $50. Any questions at this point? Great question. Where you can get more information about an emergency as it is happening. We all know about the emergency alerts that come on our phones. You can also get information from local radio stations, and making sure that, but one of the key things is to make sure you're getting information from a reliable source, making sure that you have it. Don't just go to social media and see anything that everybody is saying. Make sure that it is a reliable source. Could be a local health unit, police or fire department. Could be the local municipality or the province. Those would be your most trusted sources of information. Again, you should update your kit supplies. You should check them at least twice a year. Make sure that they are as up to date as possible, and anything that is about to expire, make sure that it gets replaced. And that includes not just the food and water, but your first aid kit supplies, batteries, all of those things. Just check the dates on them and make sure that you are replacing them before they expire. Excellent question. Well, you can buy a radio or a first aid kit really anywhere. Obviously, as was covered, in many cases, you may be able to get them at your local Salvation Army thrift store. We've also had some folks who have been able to pick them up at their local dollar store. They don't have to be really expensive items. Certainly, you would want to make sure if you're getting a radio that is battery operated, again, make sure that you're getting batteries to go with it. Well, there you have it. The 3 steps that will help you and your family to be ready for anything. Know the risks, make a plan, and get or make an emergency kit. For more information about the Salvation Army's emergency disaster services, I'd invite you to visit salvationarmy.ca/EDS. If you would like information on ordering one of our Salvation Army emergency preparedness kits, please email us at eds@salvationarmy.ca. Thank you for joining us for our Emergency Preparedness Week webinar. I hope you've enjoyed learning more about how you and your household can be ready for anything.